Okay, for everybody coming in, I'm going to get started in just a second. If you have your paper and pencil, I have a bunch of different kinds that I'm going to go through when we start. Really, you only need one pencil just to learn, but as you draw more, you can start to think about different tools that you want to use to build up to different values. Because if you look at, so this is the main tool that I use. It's basically just like a graphite stick that's loaded into a holder. And I use it because you can just build up values pretty quickly. But the drawback is that they're not very dark. And so if I just do something like that, that's pretty much the basic line quality. But then when you get to something like a 5, so this is a 5B, you can see that it's immediately a little bit darker, and so you can build up really sharp lines faster that way. But this is what I'm going to be showing you guys how to draw. And before we actually go through the drawing itself, I want to talk about kind of the different things that I encourage people to do and encourage people not to do when they're learning how to draw. And the first thing is your line quality when you're drawing. So I see a lot of people who are not super experienced in art, they tend to draw in these kind of like halting line sections. So it's like that, and then like that, and then like that. And this, I think, is I think it's just a little too overthought. And so when we actually go through the drawing exercise, I think you should just try to make sure that your pencil is always moving. You're really just working around and slowly refining it as you go. And it's a 15-minute portrait, so it doesn't have to be absolute perfection. It's fine if it's a little bit sloppy, because really it doesn't have to be completely perfect. Oh, my camera's sliding. So with that in mind, let me just tighten that up a little bit. Keep your pencil moving all the time. Try to plan out your composition as you're doing it. So the first big trick that I encourage people to use is, and I talked about this in the drawing workshop that I did in the office, is you can use your pencil as a guide marker when you're plotting things out. And so you can kind of see on the webcam, but if I move the pencil close, you can see now that the distance of the pencil as it appears in your foreground vision is the same as the height of the piece of paper. And so you can also take that over to, you can do the same thing to your subject. And you could say, okay, well, I know that the eyeball goes up this far on the pencil, for instance. And so then you translate it and you can plot out your composition better. The other thing is to not overthink your shading. And so I have these shapes here. And if you look at a cube, you can see that there are really sharp value lines. So you have like the brightest point, and then it's immediately a darker shade when you're at this different angle. But then if you look at this lovely egg timer, you can see that around the edges of the shape, it sort of like fades into darkness. And the face is a bunch of those hard and soft shapes, and you should think about them in terms of being shapes and what the edge is actually doing. And so if you look at the reference photo, his jawline, it's a pretty hard shape, and so the shadow underneath, that can be really sharp. But his cheeks, that is more of like a gradual thing that kind of curves away from the light. And so you don't want to just like slap down a really, really hard line, because it's going to not register the way you want, and it's going to, it's going to feel like your drawing is overworked. And then as we go along, don't be afraid to leave things incomplete as far as the outline. We don't, always walk around with like sharp lines around our nose, our eyes, our lips, etc. And so think instead about what is happening with the shadow and use the shadow to make the actual shape that you want. Okay, so I don't see any questions. So I am just gonna go ahead and I'm gonna get started. So I'm going to get a lovely fresh page and we're gonna just lay out kind of how, and follow along. Feel free to interrupt me if there's anything that I'm not covering or if I'm doing it too quickly. But just follow along and either with the photo or, if you're drawing your family member, you can do that as well. So I just sort of start plotting out what I want the head, where I want the head to be. And it's super easy, and I may even do this again, so I apologize if I do. It's super easy to misjudge the size of the head, because when we think about a face from the front view, there is it limits us to what is actually happening behind, which is like you have all this like headspace where the brain is. Okay, so I'm just gonna plot this out, and then I really don't spend a ton of time at this point. One, because I don't want to put down too many lines that I then have to erase, and I just want to have like a really, really light touch so that once I actually figure out the lines that I like and where I want to put it down, I can do that without it looking like it's too muddy. So do the lips, and then I really try to avoid doing too much as far as underlining or outlining the lips, because that tends to look a little like you have just a really, really thick lip liner, which depending on who you're drawing, that might be actually exactly what you want, but not here. And so you can continue to just kind of put it together and either, strengthen the structure or just kind of say like, oh, I think I may have misjudged that. And it'll slowly take shape. And as you go, once you get to the point where you want to see, I thought I was going to make it centered, but I, again, underestimated how big his head was. When you get to where you want to start locking in the details, you can use the different parts of the face as guidelines for each other. And so if I look at like his eyebrow that's in the foreground, for instance, I can try and draw that out. And then if I look at this little line that he has above his eyebrow, I think of it in terms of how much comparatively lengthwise it is to the eyebrow. So it's maybe like there, and then you can go. And this helps you from getting lost, because there are two easy ways to get lost while you're drawing and end up with something that is the complete wrong proportion. One is to spend too much time on one particular thing. And so if I were to draw out this eyebrow and then I wait until the eyebrow is perfect to move on, I could end up down the road realizing, oh, like his eye is in the total wrong spot. It's not high enough. I did, the nose is the wrong shape. And then you're kind of stuck with this one beautiful, gorgeous, lovely eyebrow. And then, the rest of the drawing is something that you don't even like. And then the other is to not have, kind of a map to show you the way. And so I'm just continuing to mark things out super lightly. And if you're using just one pencil, just make sure that you have like a really light touch. Don't hold it like that and do straight up and down. Just kind of hold it to the side. And again, you're not really stopping. You're just, you know, marking things continually, just having a good time. And then, okay. And so for the nose here, I know that we have this little like curve, and then it comes in, and you want to resist the temptation to over outline and overdraw something without really looking at what it is you're seeing, because we always think about what we consider to be a symbol that tells us this is a nose, this is a mouth, and it can take you away from what you're actually looking at. And so like the shape of the nostril, I'm just gonna kind of benchmark it here, and then I can decide if I need to adjust that. But then I'm just doing a slight line because there's a dark point right here, but I'm not going to go all the way up here yet. And then if you see within the picture, there's a little bit of shadow detail here, and then it's really soft on the bridge, but it's not going to be super sharp when we're actually filling in the details toward the top of the bridge, because that's where the light is. And then it's going to get a little bit darker down here. And then I just do that. That's dark, so we can make that a line. This part I try not to get too invested in. But then, okay. So if I look at where I ended the nostril and where that is on the lips, it's like right aligned with this part that comes up on the bottom lip, and then it feeds into this line, the line of the mouth. And then the actual line, if we look at it, it almost lines up with right where his eye starts. And so if I just take that and go straight down, then I know that it should go out here. And this is gonna be, I mean, this is crucial stuff when you are, when you're drawing somebody that is at an angle that you're not used to, because otherwise your brain is just going to try and naturally simplify it. And if you make stuff up, it doesn't always work. So then, like, look at this chin. So if it was straight, if it was straight on, it would probably look completely different. It would probably look a lot more even. But at this angle where his face is sort of like it's tilted a little bit up and away from us, it's showing a completely different dimension of the shape. So this is more almost rounded, and then this right where, so you have the cleft, and then it's almost like, it's almost rectangular, how it just sort of like goes back at that angle. And so, okay, so we do that, and then just keep following the jawline. That'll probably get adjusted, because again, that's something that it's very easy to get wrong. There's a little bit of skin below his neck, and so we don't want to just give him like this completely like sharp jaw. He already obviously has a great jawline, but we don't want it to be unrealistic, because the way that you're successful at a drawing is based on your ability to, you know, hit the cues that tell somebody not just this is a person, but this is this specific person. And so, all right. And this is why these lines are super helpful, because now I can say, okay, so this is where the sideburn needs to be. That the bottom of the sideburn probably goes like mid nostril. So I just do that. And then go like that. And then you can start the ear. Ears can be super tricky. It is something that I get lazy about all the time. But ears are important, I think. Okay, so it looks like we may have to adjust this higher, because it looks like the eye, the top of the eye is actually a little bit below the top of the ear. So if I do it like that, then you can pull it down. Okay, and then it goes below the bottom of the sideburn, and it becomes the sort of origin of the jaw. Is that a little big? Whatever. We're just gonna roll with it. So I'll just continue to do that, and then from this point in the ear, you can see that's where the back of his hair starts, and that goes down pretty much to this curve in the jaw. So then we can take that up, continue taking it up, and then I'm just going to kind of go off of this the hair on the temples to start in on this part, and then connect. And then this is all just, I think this is just, we're going to make this just swirly stuff today. That's a little bit much to do individual hair detail when you're super new, so no stress there. But then finish the neck, and then I'm just going to draw down this collar. Okay, and there we go. So this is just kind of my basic architecture, and now I'm going to take the same lighter tool, and if you have just the one pencil, the same lighter touch, and I'm just going to start putting in the shadows as these sort of like blocks of shadow, which will slowly shape the face. And so anytime you see this sort of darker value, I'm just putting something down, and then as we shape the face more and more, because we're continuing to just move around, it's like we're sculpting this. As the face takes shape more and more, you can get a little bit more confident with the shadow lines, and you can deepen them. But you don't want to get too overly ambitious, and you don't want to, if you can avoid it, especially with white paper, you want to avoid shading something that is going to end up being white, because there's only so much you can do, especially when you're at the darker values, to get rid of the pencil mark. And so if you look at the original drawing really quick, so I left a spot right here where I wanted to leave like some light for the pupil, and really I didn't have to erase that or anything. And the same with the stuff in the nose and this like small line of highlight that we have right above our lip. The secret to making it, I think, look as good as possible when you're working with white paper is to just kind of avoid it entirely. Oh, see, and you can tell like between the two drawings that they're a little different. It's just part of the process. Okay, so darken there. I'm gonna take this sort of like little bit of shadow here, and let's see, here I'm gonna do this. This line is obviously gonna be a lot sharper, but it's more of like a combination shape. So if we look at the cube versus the egg timer, it's got like a very slight amount of curving shadows, but then you get to where the line really sharpens, and that's just like deep, 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 deep. Does anybody have any questions? I haven't seen anything so far. So I assume you're either following along and you're doing brilliantly, which I'm sure is the case, or you're spectating, which is also great. Don't forget about the ears, and I'm just putting down shapes. You don't really have to like commit to anything crazy at this point. And for hair, when you get more advanced, you can start to get like really crazy with it. But for now, I'm just going to, there's like a little bit of light right here and a little bit of light like right there. And so I'm gonna, I guess, generally leave that just to be a little bit of like a soft or kind of light touch highlight. And then I'm just gonna keep going with all of that. Okay, and then I'm going to start to darken a little bit more now, just start to be a little bit more deliberate. I'm gonna go ahead and use, I use this pencil a lot for drawing. It's a 5B, and so I shared the link to the pencils that I normally work with a lot. And if you look at the link and you're not super familiar with pencils, there's a lot of different options as far as values, and there's H's and B's and such. So the H stands for hardness, and it will determine, I guess, basically how hard the lead is, and it makes for a lighter line and not a lot of color deposit. And then B is for black, and it is more of like the softness. They're the softer lead that will deposit more. And so you get more of like, you get more of the payoff that you want in terms of value. Both are great. I think if you have an H, that can be good for a lot of the like lighter sketching before you get really into the darker colors, but you want something sharper for the really dark values. So like his eyebrow is super, super dark. I think it's virtually black. And so you want to make sure that that shows up as one of the darker parts. And so is the top of his eye. So the closer you can get to like that dark value, the better. So do I have a secret for smudging the page being left-handed? The answer is I don't. It can be really, really tricky with pencils. It's usually not a problem in the early stages when you're just using like a light touch or like a graphite stick, because it's kind of like okay if you move it around a little bit since you're not really putting that much down. But the super, super sharp details, I do like those to stay in place, and my solution to that is actually I use a watercolor pencil. So the watercolor pencil, it's super, super dark, and so here I can just do this on the eyebrow. I don't know if it's actually going to register the way I want it to, but it's super, super dark, and it is basically permanent. Like it just kind of stays there. And so the advantage is once you've decided what your lines are going to be and you know that you want it to be as dark as possible, you can get a black watercolor pencil and just like lay it down. The downside is it really doesn't like come off well, and so that line that you put down better be the one that you really like, you know what I mean? And then for if you want to use those, it's good to have white too, because you can actually get a brush or you can dip it in a little bit of water and you can put the pigment right on. And so I use either a white watercolor pencil or just white acrylic paint for nose highlights, because those tend to be just kind of like or eye highlights, because that tends to be kind of like a sharp little point of light that you want, you know, to just pop at all costs. And so it helps to just have the pigment that you need for that. So it's going to keep going on the eye. Oh, it's already 4:24. Did not think that was going to go by that fast. You can do little lashes. When you do bottom lashes, this is just kind of a very specific tip, try not to have it come directly out of the bottom. And the reason why I don't do this is if you'll look at your own eyes in the mirror, you have that sort of like shelf right before like where your skin meets your eyeball that does not have, and the lashes come basically, it's around the corner. And so it's like eyeball, there's this shelf, and then there's the skin that your lashes come out of. And so if you leave that little bit of ridge in there, it can kind of help make it look more realistic. So I'm just continuing to darken kind of wherever I think I need it. Like that. It's getting really dark. And then you can build up the hair. I can do another workshop where I talk about what happens when I am doing hair for a quick portrait. Really what I do is I will just kind of like do these slashy marks in the direction that I think the hair is going, just to kind of suggest. And then I supplement that with just the straight up hatching, which will like, you can darken, so you darken the overall value since his hair is pretty black, but then the specific lines just kind of reference the direction of the hair. And you can help just sort of suggest what you're trying to get across without obsessing over it. Because that, like, hair can be one of the worst things to spend too much time on, because you could really just, like, to get hair perfectly right takes a lot of precision. And even if you're super precise, it can sometimes just be a lot of work because you're, shading a whole bunch of small individual things that are also, in certain parts acting as one thing. So for fast stuff, I really don't do a lot. Okay. And then you just keep darkening, adding more value. And you can kind of correct if you think that you need to add a little bit more distance on something, if like the lips don't go out quite as far as you think they need to. And at some point I'm going to do a digital art tutorial for anyone who has either Photoshop, or I use Procreate on my iPad. Digital art apps are really good for learning how to get good at drawing because they allow you to flip the image. And flipping the image is like one of the best ways to see what you're doing wrong immediately, because it'll just be right there in front of you. You'll say like, oh, his eyes aren't lined up right, or oh, like the jaw doesn't go back far enough. It's really good for head size too, because especially when you're working within a specific space, you can get a little edge shy, like you don't want to go too close to the edge or over the edge. But flipping the image will just show you like right away, like this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. And then once you've kind of corrected a little bit while it's flipped, you can then go back and you can fix it. So let's see. I think, yeah, I'm almost out of time. So there's not much more that I can do. But this is kind of the basic process that I go through. If you have any questions for me on Slack afterward, I can answer those as well. I appreciate everybody joining me. So I'm going to continue to do these probably every other week. If you're up for creating an account on Twitch, I'll probably do some live streams just outside of that schedule where I'm just working on digital drawings that I do in my free time, because I still like to do illustration whenever I can, and I can talk more about stuff there. So thank you for joining. Please keep practicing. Let me know what you want to see next time. And the next workshop that we're going to be doing with Xander is going to be called Bad Bob Ross. So I will send you the list, the supply list. I'm going to be doing an entire Bob Ross Joy of Painting episode, and the only thing that I'm going to know about it going in is the colors that I need, and if he decides to like block out part of the canvas with black. Everything else is just going to be totally spontaneous. We'll see how it goes. I'm terrible at drawing landscapes, so I'm sure hilarity will ensue. But that's it. Thanks for coming to the first workshop, and I'll see you guys next time.